We'll do a review on the Kutis Sichas in Chelek Yud Zayin, volume 17, the fourth Sicha for the Parsha of Kedoshim. This is a halachic insight into the status of a cotton, and the Rebbe brings out from across the spectrum of the Rambam the various places, and the Rebbe proves that a cotton actually has a chiyuv to a certain extent in some mitzvahs min haTorah, especially with the mitzvah of chinuch, as the Rebbe will bring out in the end, in the Hoirah, in the lesson of the importance of the chinuch, that you have the cotton while he's a minor, he's patur mikol mitzvahs, and yet he gets a chiyuv of Torah. But this all is connected to this parsha, in which the Rambam paskins that a minor would need a korban for the intimacy with the shifcha charufa. And the Raiva disagrees. It says there's no such a thing as a korban for a cotton. And then there is the explanation from the different meforshim trying to explain the Rambam, but needs more explanation. The Rebbe comes up with a deeper explanation. What we're talking about here is about a shifcha charufa. There's also debate exactly, but it goes according to halacha, according to Rabbi Akiva, that a shifcha charufa is a maid servant who is betrothed to an eved ivri, who is and the shifcha charufa means that she is a half free and half still a shifcha. Say, for example, if you had two partners and they owned in partnership a shifcha, and one of them decides to free this shifcha, so she becomes half mishuchreres. She has a special status that's called a shifcha charufa. So now, if an adult would have intimacy with this shifcha, who's a chetzi shifcha, chetzi bas chorin, who is betrothed to a eved ivri, then the Torah says that the woman will get malchus, the shifcha charufa will get lashes, and the person who has the intimacy with this shifcha charufa, who is betrothed to an eved ivri, that person would have to bring a korban. That's called asham shifcha charufa, an osham for the sin of the shifcha charufa. The Rambam comes up with a gewaldige chiddush that if that person who has intimacy with the shifcha charufa, then the cotton, if he's 9 years old and 1 day, that is the age in which the intimacy is considered to be intimacy. Under 9 years old, it's not considered to be intimacy. He's not old enough to have physically intimacy. But by 9 years and 1 day, that's when the act is considered an act of intimacy. So even though he is a cotton, and all of the Torah, we know that a cotton is exempt from mitzvahs, exempt from penalties. But here he would be chayiv a korban. So the Raivad makes a whole tumult. He says, how could this be? We don't have any mitzvahs for a cotton. How could we bring a korban for a cotton? Why would he have to bring a korban? And there is a whole discussion. So let's go slowly inside. And we'll go step by step. Aleph. Benegeya zu dem din von shifcha charufa, as it relates to the halacha of this maid servant who is half free and half a shivcha, called the shivcha charufa, and she is necharefes leish, she is betrothed to a evet ivri. Paskan the Rambam rules like this: Ben teisha shonim v'yom echad. If he is 9 years and 1 day old, 9 and 1 day, Shabo al Shivcha Charufa, who had intimacy with this Shivcha Charufa, who is betrothed to the Eved Ivri, and she is a Chetzi Shivcha and Chetzi Baschoidim. So then, if it meets the penalty for the woman, for the Shivcha, he loike, she would get lashes. We learn from the pasuk, she gets lashes for that act of intimacy with this cotton of this Teisha Shana V'yem Echad, v'hu maybe korban, and the minor, the one who's Nai Teisha Shana V'yem Echad, will bring the korban that is designated for the Hasham Shivcha Charufa. But the only time that the other party, the cotton, or for that matter, in any case, that we will apply the penalty of the korban to them is only if the woman, the shivcha charufa, will be liable for her penalty of lashes. And the rukavuhu shatiya, that's only if the woman is eya gedola, because that's when she would get lashes. If the shivcha that is nachrefes leish is not a gedola, then she doesn't get the penalty of malchus. Then we don't give the korban for the person who had intimacy with her, or in this case, the cotton ben teisha shana v'yom echad. Another requirement, ube'ula, we learn from the pasuk that the shivcha charufa must be somebody who already had intimacy in the past. She is a be'ula, not a besula, but a be'ula. That's a condition in. That condition would apply in across the board, whether a cotton or not. But if she is a gedola and she's a be'ula, and the act was done b'ritzoina, willingly, so that she would get malchus, then the cotton in this case would get the obligation to bring a korban asham charufa. Moshe Be'arnu, as the Rambam said, as we explained, that these are the qualifications, the conditions, these are the specifics when the Shivcha Charufa gets her lashes, and therefore that's when the cotton, in this case, would bring a korban. She'eino ish chayiv korban, because the man, this is across the board, whether a cotton or not, the man would not be liable for bringing the korban ad shetischayiv hi malchus, until the shivcha charufa, the woman, is obligated malchus. Otherwise, if she doesn't get malchus, and she will not get malchus if it wasn't done willingly, if she didn't do it willingly, and if she wasn't already a be'ula, and if she wasn't a gedola, she would not get malchus, so then he wouldn't bring a korban. Where do we see that she has to get malchus in order for the guy, for the person to get the korban? Shenemar bikoires tia, this should be the examination. In other words, you have to examine and conclude that this woman is actually guilty and liable for the penalty of malchus. That is the bikoires tia, as we learn all this out in the Gemara over there. So that is when the person, the guy, brings the osham. So the same thing is the cotton. The Rambam is mechadish that the cotton, 9 years and 1 day, has a obligation to bring a cotton as long as the woman, the shivcha rufa, has the penalty of malchus. And the Raiva is masik, the Rambam, the Raiva challenges this. He says, Zeh shibush. This is a mistake. He says, Shaloi motzinu, says the Rambam, the Ravid, Cotton bar Einshi. We don't find that a minor should be punished. Now, breaking a korban, says the Rambam, says the Ravid, is a punishment. The korban zeh min ha'inshimhu. That is a korban from the penalty. So therefore, he would not have to bring a korban because there's no such a thing. On the contrary, the woman would be potter for malchus since he doesn't bring a korban, and you can only punish them both together. She is also likewise exempt from her penalty of malchus, because they have been equated that we give the punishment only if we can give it to both. And since we can't give it to the Bentei Shashonim v'Yem Echad, she's not going to get the malchus either. So we find in krisus that they are together, that you give them both the same penalty. Okay. So it seems to be that the Rambam is very difficult. Where do we find a penalty for a cotton? So there are several explanations to try to answer the Rambam. So the number one, Aleph, is the Magid Mishnah Zogt. The Magid Mishnah says, no, it's the other way around. He says, the only thing that the Torah said that we will not get, he says, the Torah says over here that you cannot give the person the korban unless the woman gets the punishment. So basically, the Torah hinged it all on the woman. In any case that she gets the punishment, then automatically the guy, in this case the Bentei Shashonim v'Yem Echad, would get the punishment, because it follows that everything goes by the woman. If the woman is obligated, then the cotton would be obligated as well. This needs explanation, as the Rebbe will elaborate later on to explain. But let's first see what the Maggid Mishnah says. The Maggid Mishnah zogt as the Rambam learned. The Maggid says the Rambam learns as hakol toli beisha shetiya bas onshim, that everything hinges on the woman. It's only what we need here is for the woman to be of age of penalties. She needs to be an adult. But the guy, he doesn't need to be of age of punishment. He doesn't have to be a bar onshim. And this is the way it's brought down in the Gemara, that bisman shoisha loika or ish may be korban. Any time the woman would get malchus, the man would bring the korban. Bisman she'ein ha'isha loika, if the woman does not get the lashes because she's missing any of the criteria for a woman to get the malchus, to get the punishment, ein ha'ish may be korban, then the guy does not bring a korban. But that's the condition. But if you look, the Gemara doesn't say, "V'lo amru bizman shehu einoi mevi korban he ein loike." The Chachamim did not say, "Oh, if he can't bring a korban because he's a minor, then she won't get malchus." No, it says if she gets malchus, then the guy brings the korban. Not when he doesn't bring a korban, she won't get malchus. It says in the Maggid Mishnah, says further, look the way we expound the pasuk. We darshan it, we expound it as follows. It says, "Bekoires tiya." So that means that you need to inspect and make sure that she is chayiv, she is guilty, and she's a bas oishim. And then the pasuk says, "V'hevies hashamay." Then he brings a korban osham once she is guilty. Umashma ho loitiya bekoides. But if there is no inspection and we don't make her liable for the malchus, then lo yavi, then he doesn't bring the korban. So the only way not to bring the korban is when she's not liable. It doesn't say, however, the other way, aval lo mashma, but it doesn't appear. It does not derive from it. Or im lo yavi lo tiya bekoides. The other way around. If he doesn't bring a korban because he's a minor, there should be no malchus over there. And therefore, it only works one way, that if she gets malchus, then he brings the korban. He's a minor, it doesn't matter. The Rambam holds that everything is hinged on her, that she needs to be getting malchus. Unzi is loike, she is loike. Their father is who? Maybe korban. That's why he brings the korban. But it's understood. Okay, he's saying that this is a pasuk, and this is a the Torah hinged it that way. But other than saying this is like a gzeres hakosu, without any reason, why don't we find anywhere else a cotton should be liable? Somehow, in this case, we actually extend liability to this cotton, as the Rebbe will bring out in certain cases. The cotton by Shifra Charufa, his act is actually considered part of it, as we'll see. But first, the Rebbe asked this answer in of itself does not yet suffice to answer the question. But the Tiritz Daf HaMazbara, this answer needs still some explanation. It needs to explain. Let it be true that it's all up to the woman. She is the one that determines that the guy is chayiv in the onshim. But here we're talking about you want to obligate a minor. How could you obligate a minor? If he's an adult, you're going to say when the adult, he would only be liable if she is liable. But here we're talking about a cotton. How could you, for that reason, obligate a minor? As the Ravid says elsewhere, the his argument, he says, the yoimer against the Rambam. If you're going to say, if he will say, if the Rambam will say, well, the man is hinged on the woman, but the woman is not hinged on the man, so therefore everything is on her, but still says the Ravid, but where do you know this? Where can we take this out that we're going to obligate a minor through the woman? It's everything is up to the woman, yes, but he needs to be of age to be mechayiv. So how could we be mechayiv him in that case? So what is the Rambam say that the minor who is 9 years old and one day will be chayiv in the korban? Further, the Rebbe brings down in the brackets, Oich dos was der Advaz zogt. The Advaz also, this was the Advaz says, he wants to suggest that a korban is not a punishment; it's a kapora, and therefore a kotniya. So the Rebbe asks, so why is this the only case that a cotton has a kapora? Why don't we find a korban for a cotton anywhere else? If it's something which a cotton needs to do when there is no punishment for him. This that the Radvaz says, the Rambam halt. The Rambam's view is as korbanos seine nit kein einish nor a kapora, that the korbanos are not a punishment, but rather they are an atonement. And the Rebbe explains the Radvaz, therefore, Even though a minor is not somebody who you can punish, he's not somebody of punishment, but he also needs an atonement. So the Rebbe said that's not understood. The Radva's answer is l'chayda nit maspik. It's not sufficient. Why would a minor need the atonement of a korban specifically by the Aveira, by this sin of Shulcharufa? Need when is over of under Aveira. We don't find is that he will get an atonement, not a punishment, but just an atonement when the minor violates other sins. What means in which you are liable for a korban. We don't say it by the cotton, by a minor. So why all of a sudden by Shifcha Charufa? It needs more explanation that the Shifcha Charufa is somehow the act of the minor is considered more in order to obligate him in this kapore, in this punishment. That's one answer, the answer of the Maggid Mishnah. Then we have the Lecha Mishnah base. Lecha Mishnah Zokt. Lecha Mishnah, the Rambam, he says that this is actually a machlokes, and he says that we find Beferish Torah's Kahanim, which says that a minor is obligated. If he's 9 years and 1 day, he is obligated. He brings the Mokadas Rambam is from Teres Kahanim. That's from Teres Kahanim. Or from Pasik, when it says in the verse, Ish Prat Lekotten, a man that has the intimacy with the Shifcha Charufa. The Pasik says the Ish. So from that Ish, we learn that a minor is exempt. Now, so maybe you might think that we're also going to exclude a 9-year-old and 1 day that he does not also bring a korban because it says ish prat lekotten. Amud loimer, that's what the pasuk says. V'ish, there's an extra vav. V'ish ki yishka ves isha shikva zera v'yishivcha nechrefes leish. The vav could have said ish ki yishka as isha. It says v'ish. The vav is moisik, adds. So therefore, tamaloim v'ish. So we know that advantasha is obligated. So according to the Torah's Kohanim, it seems quite clear, like the Rambam says, as a source for the Rambam, that advantasha shonim is obligated in the korban. And the reason why the Raiva disagrees, when the Raiva paskin with the Gemara in Krisus, he rules like the Gemara in Krisus was halt, as makshu lehadodi, that they are equated to each other, and therefore we have to equate the woman also to the man, to the guy, and if he's potter, she's potter. Not to say that he is included in pasuk, but in a case when he is potter, she would be potter too. He held like was halt as makshul adodi, nidvit the Teres Kohanim, which says that you can be a punishment for the minor, and therefore you have an exemption if the minor is potter. So then the woman will be potter, and that's why he holds that there's no punishment. That we compare the woman to the man. So either one of them, whether it's the woman or it's the guy, if they're a minor, or they're a katan, or she's a minor, he's a minor, or she's a minor, so in the Beit Potter, they both be exempt. Okay, so while the Lechem Mishnah shows us a very clear source for the Rambam, we still have a problem that the reasoning why is Takes Shivcha Charufa different. That over here, the Torah says that a Ben Teisha should be punished. Those Dartman verstehen. This also we need to understand. What is their time? What's the reason? Loit in Teres Kahanim, that according to Teres Kahanim, because we just said there is a machlokes between Teres Kahanim and the Gemara. The Gemara Takes Potter. But according to the Teres Kahanim, the minor is Chai. Was Davke Bashivcha Charufa is dot the limud that it's specifically by the Shivcha Charufa we have this special that Vov to Marbezain, that special learning to include a Ben Teisha Shonim V'Yemecha, to include a 9 years old in one day. And now, similarly, by other prohibited intimacies, and we don't find a 9-year-old to be liable. Over there too, since he's 9 years old, so that the intimacy is considered an act of intimacy. And why don't we say that he should bring a carbon also over there? I can't sagen as if them is the talking time. So while you could say there's no reason for this, nor sees a gezedes hakosub, but this is a pasuk says that's the way it is, so no questions asked. That's why should we accept that? It's more smoother to say that there is an explanation over here, and the Rebbe will go on to explain the status of the cotton in various different places and how the Rambam treats the cotton, and then we'll bring it around, circle around back to the Shivcha Charufa. Noise base, the Rebbe points to another halacha in the Rambam, so that we find the obligation of a korban also on a cotton, which is in the Rambam. The Rambam rules that if a minor becomes an adult between the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni, so he wasn't obligated in the first Pesach, so then he has to bring the second Pesach. He became an adult, he became 13, he turned 13. So he'd have to bring in the second Pesach because he wasn't obligated yet. And now there's a new obligation, the Pesach Sheni, he has to bring it. But if they had counted the cotton in the first Pesach, he is potter from bringing the second one. But how could that be? Being counted on the first one as a minor, how could that be considered that he fulfilled the obligation because he was counted on when he wasn't a minor then? Why shouldn't he not have to bring the Pesach Sheni whether they counted him or not? Let's look inside. Base. Achiyuv Korban. We find a obligation of a Korban mitzvah, and similarly a obligation on a mitzvah, if a cotton on a cotton, you find man in noch erter in Rambam umehem. We find in other places of the Rambam, and of them, Rebbe is going to bring down. First of all, is in Hilchos Korban Pesach. The laws of the Korban Pesach. Paskun the Rambam rules. Ger shemizgair bein Pesach Rishon le Pesach Sheni, a convert that converts in between the first and the second Pesach. V'chein kotten shehigdil bein shenei psochim, or same thing is true, says the Rambam, if you have a minor who became an adult in between the two Pesachs, Kayovin Lasis Pesach Sheni, they have to make a second Pesach. because they didn't do the first Pesach, they have to do the second one. However, v'im shochtu olav b'rishain potter, if they shechted for the minor during the first Korban Pesach, he doesn't have to bring the cotton the second Korban Pesach. Frag der Kesef Mishnah, the Kesef Mishnah asks, Otu cotton bar chiyuva upi turahu, is a minor then somebody who is obligated or exempt? We say that he already brought for him. Is that he do his obligation because he brought the first carbon? They brought on him first carbon, but he's not somebody who is in the defined as an obligation or not obligation. And therefore, what is the answer? Because of Hari Kurkazal. Hari Kurkazal writes, the kiv on the Rachmon Ravye Lekot Sheyishchetu Alav, since the Torah has included a minor that you should shech, that you can bring him as part of those who are counted for the Korban Pesach, umimanin oisoi, and you count him, you shech him, you count him in, niftaru bekach min hasheni. So he is exempt from the second one because you counted, you shechted him, because the Torah brought him in. But again, that lacks explanation that the Rebbe needs to explain over here. Would see. Bald as soif is doch beim Pesach Rishon given a cotton, since at the end, after everything. So you say the Torah included him, but what was he at that time? Given a cotton, he was minor. When he's given potter for mitzvahs, and he was exempt from mitzvahs. And wie helft those was at zweiter hat a chiyuv. So how can it help the fact that somebody else has an obligation to bring a Korban Pesach? Unshochat ala cotton, and he shechted it for the minor. But he's shechting for a minor who's exempt. Hainins manap tur for the cotton. That's during the time that the cotton is exempt. So how could it help that shchita for the cotton if the zman hachiyu, when it is geworden agodl Pesach Sheni, or the time of the obligation, that when he became an adult during the second Pesach? So the Torah included, yes, but it is somebody who is obligated, who is bringing in the cotton, but the cotton himself cannot be l'chayra considered somebody who is obligated, and to exempt him from bringing the second Pesach Sheni. Noch mehr. Und then noch mehr von dem gefindt man Hilchos Talmud Torah. We find even more than this in the laws of Talmud Torah. More an obligation on a minor from the Torah for limud Torah, to study Torah on a minor. So we find in Hilchos Talmud Torah. But the Rambam says, Mi shaloi limdoi aviv. If a person who is not taught by his father, he is obligated to teach himself when he recognizes it. Notice the language kishiyakir, when he becomes tuned in, when he gets to appreciate that there is a Torah. So, Tzemach Tzedek notes what the Rambam doesn't write kishiyagdil. He writes kishiyakir. That means that there is a chiyuv even while he's a minor. The Tzemach Tzedek zogt shemo gam alakot yesh chiyuv midoraisa. Perhaps there is actually an obligation on the minor, an obligation of the Torah. Because why is the Tzemach Tzedek said that? Because from them was the Rambam zog, them loshen bilti rogel. The Rambam says here an uncommon language, kishayakir, when he will recognize. Not kishayagdil, not when being adult. Is mashma, so it appears, as the chiyuv alimud from cotton, that the obligation to study Torah for a minor is done noch eider vertagodl, applies even before he's an adult, because kishiyakin, that's the time that he has to start learning Torah. So this is very difficult. Is in them noch schwerer zu verstehen. So here it's even more difficult to understand. How does it apply an obligation on a minor who is not obligated to Torah mitzvahs? And here we're saying on Talmud Torah that it would be kishiyakir, it would be having a mitzvah in Torah. Samach says perhaps he's mechuyev in Torah. And the Rebbe brings out here another disagreement that we have. What is the obligation that we do mitzvahs or a cotton because of chinuch? Is it the mitzvah of the father, or it's the mitzvah of the son? The Rebbe wants to bring in from the Rambam that it becomes a rabbinical mitzvah on the son of education. It's not, it proves it from the fact that a cotton can be moitzi, an adult, if the obligation to bench would be only midrabanon. It's not kidei svia, so the minor can make the bracha, the birchas hamazon, to fulfill the obligation. That means that the Rambam holds that there is actually an obligation, in this case midrabanon, on the minor, as the Rebbe will lead it up to explain these issues with Korban and Talmud Torah, and the Korban Pesach, and the Shivcha Charufa. To verstehen das, Gimel. To verstehen das, to understand this, darf man magdim sein aggressor and chidush, we have to introduce a greater novelty in chiyuv for mitzvahs bechlal by a cotton, about the obligation of mitzvahs. Generally, when we do mitzvahs with rabbanon for a cotton, says Yedua, the machlokes harishonim, it's known the this agreement from the Rishonim, the earlier ones, Benegayed the mitzvahs was a cotton is mekayim mitzad mitchiyuv from chinuch, that a minor fulfills because of the obligation of education. Das Rashi v'Ramban. Rashi's view and the Ramban is as the midrabanon chinuch mitzvahs, that the obligation to educate, which is a chiyuv midrabanon, those mitzvahs that the obligation to educate is midrabanon, seinen lav mitzvah the day from cotton. They're not his mitzvah. Elodabu, it's his father's mitzvah. The father has a mitzvah to educate the son, but the son is not doing a mitzvah when he's doing the mitzvah. It's not his mitzvah, it's the father's mitzvah. The iu loy mechayeh b'mitzvahs koliker, because he has no obligation for mitzvahs at all. So it's not a chinuch rabbanon mitzvah on the son; it's a rabbanon chinuch mitzvah on the father. And because it's only a mitzvah on this father, can a cotton nit moitzi sein a godel in birchas hamazon. A minor cannot fulfill the obligation of an adult in his benching or similar. Even if the adult is only obligated with Rabbanon. So, Mela, when he's obligated Minat Torah, you can't have an obligation that Rabbanon exempt somebody from a bracha Minat Torah. But if the other person is only obligated with Rabbanon, still, we say the minor cannot fulfill his obligation. Why? Because the minor has no obligation, not even with Rabbanon. That's the opinion of Rashi and the Ramban, that there is no obligation for the cotton at all. So he cannot fulfill his the obligation of the person who's mechuyev midrabanan to make a bracha. On the other hand, das hat Toisus v'horan, the opinion of Toisus and the Ran is, as a cotton she'igia l'chinuch eist mechuyev b'dover midrabanan, that if he has reached the level of education, he is considered to be obligated in this matter midrabanan. Und der Riber kann der moitzi sein a godly dechebosi, and therefore he is able to, according to Toisus and the Ran, to fulfill an adult who is obligated midrabanan, because k'sha'achal shiur midrabanan, he only ate the shir midrabanan, not large enough for chaltu v'savotu v'rachta. In a Torah, he doesn't have to make the bracha, but he is making the bracha midrabanan. So a minor can fulfill his obligation because the minor is mechuyev bracha. So from this, we can see that the Rambam holds that the cotton itself is mechuyev. Then was the Rambam asking. The fact that the Rambam rules that ben mevorach la'aviv, that a son can make a bracha for his father, is muchach, is evidence, as hal, that the Rambam holds, as in the chinuch mitzvahs is the cotton mechuyev midrabanan. That in the mitzvahs of education, the minor is the one that is obligated midrabanan. It's not just a obligation of the father. So in many places, the Rambam always uses, when he talks about the minors, he talks about chayiv, like he's obligated. It's an obligation of midrabanan on the minor. In Hilchos Tzitzis, the Rambam writes, so the Rebbe's got the list now from the Rambam, various halachas, the laws of Tzitzis umedivrei sofrim, that it is from the words of the Rabbanim, from the scribes, shakol cotton sheyidei lisatev chayev b'tzitzis. Any minor that knows how to wrap up, there's an obligation in tzitzis. Kidei lechamche b'mitzvahs, in order to educate mitzvah, there's a chiyuv there. In Hilchos brachas, laws of brachas, akatanim chayovin b'birchas hamazon b'divrei sofrim. It says they're obligated to bench midrabanan. It's there an obligation. So to educate the mitzvahs. So it also seems that it sees that it's the obligation on the minors. In Hilchos Sukkah, in Lo Sukkah, it's cotton shein, it's a minor that he doesn't need his mother. He's old enough that he doesn't have to be with his mother. Is chayev v'sukkah b'divrei sofrim. So again, it says he's obligated in the sukkah d'rabbanan to educate mitzvahs. Well, there is a balulav, similar balulav. A minor who knows how to shake the time the mitzvah of lulav, I balulav divrei sofrim. So he's obligated to educate him with mitzvahs. So over here you see very clearly the opinion of the Rambam is like Toys and the Ran, that there is an obligation on the minor. Oh, here too, it's not understood. How could you possibly say an obligation on a minor, even if it's only midrabanan? He's not a person fully developed with his mind. He's a cotton, he's a minor. The Gemara uses could there be an obligation for children? Surprising way, the Gemara asks the question. How could we have an obligation for these minors in these view? So the Rebbe brings out now that the general idea that what the Rambam holds, that when something is necessary in order to perform the mitzvah, and there's various different categories. Generally, we know there's something like machshire mitzvah, according to Rabbi Lezer. The machshire mitzvah also, they get the power of the mitzvah itself. When we talk about the mitzvah pirya v'rivya, where the woman's participation is in the mitzvah, even though she is not obligated, And we find that when the women help their men study Torah, they get part of the Torah. So these are all participations which brings them into the part of the mitzvah. And yet, by learning Torah, it's even more than that, because it's not only an introduction, it's not only unnecessary in order to do the mitzvah is done with the child when we're talking about chinuch. Let's look inside. Ois Dalet. So we can say the explanation in this. This is a general svara of the Rambam in many places about what is the look, how do we look at something which is not the mitzvah itself, but it is part and preparation of the mitzvah. First, the Rebbe introduces Vishen Geret Filmol, that we already spoken many times, that we find many times, as dort wo the Torah geheißen ton a gewisse mitzvah, that in a place where the Torah told us, instructed us to do a certain mitzvah, was ir kiyum is abhängig von a peula frier. The only way, how can you observe the mitzvah? You have to have something ahead of time to do it. So then, bakumt euch de frier dike peula, the previous act that you need to do in preparation becomes a me'ein chashivus. It gets somewhat of importance on gather and part of the definition for their mitzvah, the mitzvah itself. So the parts that are necessary and you can't do the mitzvah without them, those parts get the importance and they become part of the boundaries, the definitions of this mitzvah itself. Since that is a must, that act, on ir can the mitzvah nit getan werden. Without that previous preceding act, you cannot do the mitzvah. Is as ki'ilu, so that is as if mitzuzam and mit der tzivui of der mitzvah together when the Torah commands the mitzvah, or the Torah angesagt of der peula. Torah also instructed on that act. You have to do it as well. In a general, the chlolus is those that gather for machshiri mitzvah. That's the definition of those that prepare the mitzvah. Ubefrat ledas Rabbi Lezer, especially according to the view of Rabbi Lezer, as a zainen doiches haShabbos. That's the extent of the necessary parts before the mitzvah to prepare the mitzvah, that they too override the Shabbos. If it's such a mitzvah, like a bris, would override the Shabbos, so the preparation for the bris, for the knife, or to carry whatever the preparation in order to do it, would also override. With the mitzvah alone, just in the mitzvah itself. It's as if the Torah told you, do the mitzvah and the necessary preparation. Noch mehr von dem steht in Yerushalmi. There's even more than this is stated in Yerushalmi. As oiv der hachone v'achshore to the mitzvahs sukkah lulav v'kiyotze boy. When we talk about preparing and making ready the mitzvah, so to make a sukkah, you got to build a sukkah to sit. The mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah, but you can't sit in the sukkah if you don't build a sukkah. The same thing is a lulav. You cannot be mekayim mitzvahs lulav if you don't put together the minimum with the lulav. So it says in Yerushalmi, Machtman birchas mitzvah. You're going to make the bracha on the mitzvah. So you're making a bracha on a mitzvah, even though there's no mitzvah to build a sukkah. It's a mitzvah to sit in the sukkah. But since it's necessary, you're going to make the bracha. He sanctified us with the mitzvahs and instructed us to make a sukkah. Or lasis lulav, instructed us to make a lulav, void and more. So that means that it's not only would be Doicha the Shabbat that it's important and it's part of the mitzvah, but here we're making the bracha on the other part of the mitzvah, which is only preparing for the mitzvah. Other inyan. So this idea, as a me'ein v'geder under mitzvah, this concept that something of and the definition of the mitzvah carries over trok sich iber, that it carries over another zach on something else, was is a hechrech for the mitzvah, that is important for the mitzvah, so that we're carrying it over the mitzvah to another part, is gefindt man nit nor by a peula canal. We find this not only in an act. In this case, you got to build the sukkah in order to be mekayim the sukkah, or you got to prepare the knife so that you can be circumcising with it. But also by people, you find that it transfers from the individual that is mechuyev to another individual. Not only that it starts mentioned in the Gaya Torah mitzvah, but also the combining of people as it relates to Torah mitzvahs. Uledugma. Say, for example, the din in Hilchos Talmud Torah, the law in Hilchos Talmud Torah, as one who is not able to study himself, yaspik la'achedim halimdim, he should provide for others that learn, and that will be considered for him as if he's learning by himself, on his own. So we're transferring the mitzvah of limud HaTorah to another person because he is supporting the other person who is learning Torah. He can't learn Torah on his own. It's considered as if he's doing it by himself, learning by himself. Al derech ze'oich b'negei l'noshim. A similar way also as it relates to women, it's transferred. Similar to the preparation of the mitzvah of above, that you can't do the sukkah without, or you can't do the mitzvah of the hechsher, so it's known, that which the Ran says, as a isha, is nit mitzuva b'mitzvahs pirya, a woman, although she is not instructed in the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply, she doesn't have to do the mitzvah pirya. She still has a mitzvah, because she helps the husband fulfilling his mitzvah. The husband cannot fulfill his mitzvah pirya without the woman, and since even though the woman is not mechuyev, but she has a mitzvah because she helps her husband do the mitzvah. Thus haste. The Baal, as der Baal can mekayim zayin the mitzvah nor al yidei isha, since the husband is only able to fulfill the mitzvah through the woman, hot zi oich hame'ein from their mitzvah, she also gets something of the mitzvah. Unafile in foul, and even if it was a situation when der siyua for the isha in der mitzvah from Baal is nit kein hechrech in etzem kiyuma mitzvah. In the case of pirya v'rivya, over there's no way for him to do the mitzvah without the woman's participation. But sometimes the woman can participate by taking care of the children, they're learning, and the husband's learning. They get part of the mitzvah too. When the siyua from the isha in their mitzvah from Baal, when the support of the wife in the mitzvah of the husband is nit kein hechrech in etzem kiyuma mitzvah. It's not a necessity in so that you can fulfill the mitzvah. Nor nit mer v'hayilv. It doesn't have to be, but it's only a support in zayin efshorius from kiyuma mitzvah and his possibilities doing the mitzvah. It's supporting his possibilities. Werd gepasken der din. So the din is ruled as chod zi mitzad atzma is nit mechuyev mitzvahs Talmud Torah, although she on her own is not obligated in the study of Torah, is im hi ezeres libno, quoting from the Hilchos Talmud Torah, from that if she supports her son or lebaila or her husband, begufo me'oido, with her physically, with her body, and with her money, sheyasik b'Torah, so that they can learn Torah, that he should learn Torah. Chelekas schar imohem, she splits the reward with them. Uschara gadol, her reward is actually great. Ma'achar she'mitzuvim v'osim al yada, because since they are instructed to learn, and the way they can do it is through her, so she gets tremendous schar. The bald as the limud HaTorah from the man on Zoom, the study of Torah from her husband and her son, is in them fall durch ihr Hilfe. In this case, it's through her help. She gets a part of the reward of studying Torah. So this is all in cases where they help beforehand, it's necessary and preparation to it. But here we have a need that beforehand, before you do it, you need the other party's help in order for you to be able to do the mitzvah. It's more by teaching Torah and chinuch of the child. The child is not only beforehand, but he becomes an actual component of being able to do the mitzvah. Hey, in kol hanal ober, in all of the above, however, also when we talk about those that prepare the mitzvah, and the blessing for the mitzvah of making a sukkah according to the view of the Yerushalmi, that you make the bracha lasis sukkah, lasis lulav, is das was medarf ankommen zu der Peula und hechsher ha-mitzvah und asiyas lulav v'kiyetz, this that we need to come on to that act that prepares the mitzvah, and making the lulav similar, other to siyua isha b'pirivurivya, or the support that the woman provides with multiplying, being fruitful, is thus derfar, that is because was b'metzias is the mitzvah geton geworden, that the way, actually, how did the mitzvah able to be done? Al yidei hagdama von der anderer Pul, by the introduction or first doing the other act. The hechsher v'siyuv b'chulu. That preparation, that support comes before, and that's the only way that you can do the mitzvah afterwards. The riber, and that's why vert oif der Peula nimshach. So on that act, it extends ein von chshivas v'inyan mitzvah. Similarly, something of the importance and the idea of the mitzvah also in those preparations. In Zei's aber they talk chelik prat from the mitzvah tzivui, but in all those cases, they don't have a part and a detail of the mitzvah and the commandment. They're just something else. That's not part of the mitzvah. Und der Riber werden sie nicht kein chelik von der mitzvah mamash. That's why they don't become a part of this mitzvah. The bracha is lasis lulav, to make a lulav. You don't say to sit in to shake the lulav, netilas lulav. Asiya nit netila. You say to make it, not to take. And also v'gamba divrei Haran, and also the words of the Ran with the support of the woman. Yesh lo mitzvah stam. It's not the mitzvah period. It's the mitzvah. She has a mitzvah. It's nit muchrach. It is not, and we don't know for sure that adosis that get the mitzvahs period from ish, that is the definition and the boundaries of the mitzvah period of the man. To say that the woman has, the Rambam doesn't say that. He says she has a mitzvah. It could be another mitzvah. But there's a higher level in our subject matter. Mitzvah sachinuch haderech moshel, when we talk about the mitzvah of education. And the shaychus, the ishtatfus from cotton in their mitzvah chinuch, the connection and the participation of the minor in the mitzvah of education, bastet nit belois in them, was on them cotton. It consists not only in the fact that if there is no minor, there's no child, the father cannot fulfill the mitzvah of chinuch if there's no child there. That's not the pshat. The pshat is that the Child is part of the mitzvah chinuch. Not oich was das is the mitzvah. Now he can't do it. That is the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to mechanech the child. Der Av soll mechanech sein. The father should educate. Und der Ben soll tun the mitzvah, and the son should do the mitzvah. That's part of education. Und der Riber, and therefore, euch ledas ha-toises va-Rambam. Also, according to the opinion of Toises Rambam, who said before that if the father, if you want to make a bracha, the son makes a bracha, he can fulfill the obligation of the father. So, yesh loiman, we can say the chachomim takem b'lechatchila arev gilek dem chiyuv achinuch nor oifen av nit oifen ben. Only the father is obligated. Before we tried to say that who is mechuyev, that according to Tosfos and the Ran, since the son can be moitze, his father who is mechuyev only in a case where he's mechuyev only midrabanan, that means that the son has a chiyuv midrabanan. No, you can say that also according to Tosfos and the Rambam, they place the obligation for the chinuch nor oifen av or nit oifen ben, only on the father, not on the son. The bald ober, however, since as the mitzvah av is lechanech, what is the mitzvah? The mitzvah of the father is to educate. As der ben soll bekam sein the mitzvah that the son should fulfill the mitzvah. There the derech memela oifen ben is chayvus in him keep the mitzvah. So automatically, without placing it on him, automatically becomes an obligation of the fulfillment of the mitzvah on the son. Haste oich der ben amechuy bedover, so also the son is considered amechuy bedover, and he can be moitzi. To use a little different style. The bald as der of is mechuyev zu mechanech zayin as benoi, since the father is obligated to educate his son. Last is a mitzvah, the mitzvah is choch as asiyas abenes mitzvah is mitzadem. So when we look, why is the son doing the mitzvah? If you're looking from the chiyuv, because the father has an obligation. From that obligation, the son gets to do the mitzvah. Is this abadoch pulas hamitzvah b'shleimus? Who does the mitzvahs fully? Are they akotim? Mitzat shivush alav. It's because the father was commanded. But who does it? The doing of the mitzvah is the son. Und der Riber heißt der Kotna mechuyev bedover. That's why he's considered obligated in the matter. Bizaz that is moitza godel, according to Tosfos and the Ran, he can fulfill the obligation of the adult, but is mechuyev nor midrabanan, because he's also mechuyev midrabanan, because he's the one that does the mitzvah. Weil derech ze gefindt man bei mitzvahs der Reise, it will come on. We find it also by mitzvah Torah that the participation actually brings about the obligation, a Torah obligation, on the person that's participating. The Rebbe brings down his vov adugma lahanal by mitzvahs deraisa to bring an example by Torah mitzvahs by chiyuv simcha beregel. We know that on the Yom Tov there's an obligation of rejoicing. So the husband goes up to the Beis Hamikdash and he brings the Shalomei Simcha, the meat over there. That becomes a Simcha al-Babasar v'yayin. But women don't have to go up Aliyah Regel. So the Gemara says, Zokt Abaye, so Abaye says, Isha Baila Mesamcho, that a woman, her husband rejoices her. That's her joy in the Yom Tov. How does the husband rejoice her? Makes her happy. Zokt Rashi, Bebavel, Bebigdei Tzevenu Chulu. If you're talking Babylonia, they would use colored garment, beautiful a new dress, a new clothing, make her happy. That's the Abaye solution. According to this, it turns out that the women did not go up to bring us the regular simcha. Why do we need? So they didn't go there, so they needed to have the clothing. If Tosfos, so Tosfos asks a question from Chagiga. In the Gemara Chagiga it says, "Ezeu cotton the potter miriya." Over there it says, how young, how small is the one who's potter from seeing, doesn't have to come along to witness the Sholosh Regalim. So it says, Kol she'eino yochel lechos biyodi shel aviv, v'lalos b'Yerushalayim l'Harabais. Anyone who cannot hold on to his father's hand and go up from Yerushalayim onto the Temple Mount, that's too young. And he's potter from Riyah. So the Gemara in Chagiga asks on this, fragt the Gemara, ad hocha man asye. So who brought him till this point? Now you need him to go up on the mountain. But how did he get to Yerushalayim? How did he get to this point? Umeshani, and the Gemara answers over there on this question, ad hocha de mechayve imei besimcha aise v'chulu. Up till this point that his mother is mechuyev in this simcha, so she brought him. She also has to have simcha. So here we see clearly Tosfos asked that the woman is mechuyev besimcha. She came to b'misameach. That's why she is the one that brought that child. Mashma shezukuk alalis mishum shalmi simcha. So it appears that she's required to go up to the Harabais to make a lila regel because shalmi simcha. So that's Tosfos' question. So she is mechuyev in the riyah. So the Rabbi Tam explains, why does the Gemara say here the husband makes her happy? She's participating herself. So the Rabbi Tam explains, because the obligation is on her husband and not on her. So it's not really the woman's obligation. Why does the Gemara say in Chagiga, we're talking about the husband and not because of her. So you see, according to Tosfos' view, Tosfos says we're calling it a chiyuv on the woman because she's here for her husband, and therefore it's called that she is mechuyev in the simcha. That she's that Tosfos. So we see according to Tosfos' view, although on the woman by herself there is no obligation of simcha, simcha. A bald oberes is a mitzvah from Baal. But since it is a mitzvah on the husband to mesameach zayin ishtoi, as ishtoi has to rejoice his wife, bakumt oich ir simcha ageder for mitzvah. So then her simcha becomes part of the mitzvah. These are the Gemara zok to feed them loshen, to the extent the Gemara calls her, says the language, the mechayve b'mitzvah simcha, that she's obligated to simcha. Even though she's not obligated to simcha according to Tosfos, it's her husband that is obligated, and she's there to go together with her husband. The husband is supposed to misameach her, but she gets the definition of chayva b'simcha. Nitva by piri v'rivya, unlike as we said before, the language when by piri v'rivya the rosh naran is yesh lo mitzvah, that she has a mitzvah. Apian al kemen al derech zeh masbir zayin. Based on this, we can similarly explain when it some chiyuv Talmud Torah if a cotton the obligation of learning Torah for a minor. As the Tzemach Tzedek explained the Rambam that we mentioned in Sif Beis, that there is a chiyuv. He says, "Kivon the Talmud Torah leidom l'shar mitzvahs." Talmud Torah is not similar to other mitzvahs. The Bishar mitzvahs ain't of mechuyev l'chanech b'noi midaraisa. Over there, there's no obligation in other mitzvahs from the Torah to educate your son. That's a rabbanon, elma divrei sofrin. Abu b'tam Torah mechuyev midaraisa lilmoid has b'noi chulu. Over there, from the Torah is mechuyev. In Cain, shemo gam alakot yeshki midaraisa. Perhaps in the minor there is also an obligation with the Torah. So, what does this mean from the Tzemach Tzedek? Yeshleimer apirush, we can say the meaning. The bald asizdo achiv deraisa mitzadam of. If the Maisa limud from cotton, since there is a Torah obligation, because the father on the act of learning of the cotton, the minor, hod zayin limud ageder from chiyuv. So then his study becomes defined as obligation. The riber is b'shas as loy lomdei aviv, when his father did not teach him. Laibdo achiv mitzad Torah remains achiv mitzad the Torah. So before we showed it by the Rabbanon, and here the Rebbe shows it by Torah, by the mitzvah of limud Torah. In Ois Zayin, the Rebbe will explain using the same concept that the Rebbe has explained that there becomes a chiyuv. The Rebbe is going to explain that this is actually the meaning and explanation of the Mari Kurkus that was brought down, the Rebbe brought down before, about the halacha that the Rambam says that if you counted the cotton in the Korban Pesach, that he would not have to bring the second Korban Pesach. And the Rebbe quoted before from the Mari Kurkus, because since the Torah included him, so he was Yotzei the Chiyuv. So based on what we explained, that when the chiyuv of comes as part of the performance of the mitzvah, then there's actually a mitzvah on the cotton over there. V'yeshloimar, let's look inside. V'yeshloimar, as al derech hanal, that's similar to the above, is oich der biur hatiritz fu Mari Kurkus. This is also the explanation of the answer, Mari Kurkus, of the Rambam, by Korban Pesach, and the Rambam by Korban Pesach. It says over there, the Rambam is that if they shechted on the minor be on the first Pesach, so then and he became an adult, he does not have to bring the second Pesach. At the Mari Kurkus writes, Kiv on the Rachmon Rabbi Lekotten, Sheyishchatu Olav Manimoisoi, that since the Torah has included the minor that you shecht on him, and you count him in, that exempts him from the second korban. So this is because he becomes part of the mitzvah. Now, first, the Rebbe is going to bring down that this, that we're saying that he's potter, if he was specifically the cotton, if he was specifically counted as an individual, but the Ragachover says if he was counted as part of the family, we didn't count him specifically, then he would have to bring the second Korban Pesach, which basically means when it wasn't because of his chiyuv, then he still has to bring. Then he wasn't yotzei yet. It's only because we counted him and the Torah was marbe him that it counts. Let's look inside. Ubahagdim was the Ragachover is masbir by introducing first what the Ragachover explains as the din Rambam im shochtu olav berishon potter, that when the Rambam says that if you shechted on him on the first Pesach, you're exempt from the second Pesach. Nor b'shas der avot meini given them cotton. It's only in a case where the father counted the minor from Korban Pesach on the Korban Pesach als einem from bnei chabura. He was one of the people of the group that are joined into this Korban Pesach. Damut is a potter min hasheni, then he's exempt from the second one. But if the korban was shechted in a way, as their cotton is nichl geworden, that the cotton became included, not because they counted him separately, but he's just included in celebes ovis. He is a sheep for the family, he's part of the family. So he was also included. Even if we should say that this celebes ovis is min ha-Torah. So it turns out that the cotton was included min ha-Torah in the Korban Pesach, but not as an individual, as one of the Bnei Chabura, but just as a family member. But then the Rakachova argues, is dan Chai B'Sheni? He would be Chai on the second Pesach. Vorum, because those was a cotton can essen mitzad celibase ovis, this that a cotton can eat of the Korban Pesach, because there is a sheep for the whole family. He says the farvos and his bottle tzumav. That is because he is subjugated and he's secondary to the father. He eats as a secondary to a father, part of the family. But not because he is an entity by himself. So he never brought the Korban Pesach. The riber is the cotton al samenj bifnei atzmei. Therefore, the minor as an independent person, nit given the mitzvah's Korban Pesach. He wasn't in the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach. Shas over der av hot imoyne given al pischoi. However, when the father counts him as a person, as part of the group on the Pesach, hot men geschochten the Korban Pesach euch fardem ben. So then the Korban Pesach was not shechted for the family, for the father and the son just came along, but we shechted him specifically for the son as well. Then Dafki is a potter b'sheni. Only then is a potter on the second one, says the Ragachova. So what's the explanation? So the explanation of this is similar to what we said before. The Torah zok as a cotton can sein von the menuim, since the Torah says that a cotton can be one of those that is counted. Ametzi is bifnei atzmei, that he can be independently recognized and be part of the Chabura, counted for that Korban Pesach. Oifa Korban Pesach. So it turns out as mitzad mitzvahs ha-Torah from Av, that because the mitzvah of the Torah that is on the father is the cotton together mitzvahs Korban Pesach, the cotton becomes part of the definition of the mitzvah Korban Pesach. And therefore, and that's why is oiv shochtu olav b'rishon is a potter b'sheni. If you shechted him on the first one, he's exempt in the second one, because the fact that the father has a chiyuv and the Torah allows him to count his son as part of the Mechabura, extends that chiyuv to the son as well, and he would be exempt from making the Korban Pesach Sheni. And the same thing circles back now to explain the idea of the cotton by the Shivcha Charufa, that he becomes an entity because through him becomes the chiyuv malchus for the Shivcha. Based on the above, we can say similar to the Bakotten, Ben Tes Shonim v'Yem Echad Shabbat Shivcha Charufa, a 9-year-old in one day who has intimacy with a Shivcha Charufa, he loike who may be korban. So she gets malchus and he brings a korban. Why would he all of a sudden bring a korban? He's a minor. Bald as durch sein Bia wird achiv malchus min ha-Torah. Of der Shivcha Charufa, since through his intimacy, that brings about the obligation of malchus. The Torah says that the woman, the Shivcha Charufa, gets malchus of the Shivcha Charufa. Es is a pa'ula was bringt achiv malchus. It's an act that brings with it an obligation of malchus. Bakumt zayin pa'ula oich ha-toikef min ha-Torah. So then his act gets a force from the Torah, v'negei lahapoil, as it is in actuality, u'mevir korban, and it brings a korban. Darfo makapore. He needs to have an atonement because it is an act. It's an act that causes malchus for the other person. Mela, that means that he has the power of an act, and therefore he has to need a kapara. So why only do we say this with regards to the cotton, that his act only works by the Shivcha Charufa and opposed to all other arayis, he would be potter. They're tam in them. So what's the reason? Why is there a difference in the mechiluk zwischen isur shivcha charufa and andere arayis, between the prohibition of the shivcha charufa, in which the cotton needs a kapora and brings a korban, and all the other arayis where the cotton is potter legamri, he's totally potter, doesn't bring a korban, nothing. Yesh loymar, we can say mitzad der anderskeit bechlal, because the general difference when isur shivcha charufa legabe andere isur arayis, from the prohibition of shivcha charufa as it relates, compared in contrast to the other isur arayis prohibition by arayis. We'll be showing the Rambam, to use the lashon of the Rambam. Biyas shivcha zu mishuna mekol biyas asuris shebetoira. This intimacy of this shivcha is different than all other kinds of intimacies that the Torah prohibited. Sharehi loike, because she gets malchus, and he shenemar b'koydestia, that you get, you need to inspect, and the b'koydes means the malchus, and she will get malchus, v'hu chayv korban noshim, and he would be chayv a korban noshim. She gets malchus, it's strange, and he gets a korban. Shenemar v'hevis hashomei, he brings a osha. Echad shoygig ve'echad mezid. Whether he's mistaken, whether he does it intentionally, v'shivcha charufa maybe osha, v'shivcha charufa you bring an osha. So this is a strange prohibition that the Torah says. What makes it strange? Was from the Mloshen is mashma, those what the Einish is anders. So from the language, the Ram is mashma, that because there's a different punishment for the man and the woman, is arayas that etzim isur be shivkos u'mishunas. So that is an evidence that this intimacy is different. So because the punishments are so strange, and also, the Rambam is mamshich. Also, the Rambam continues. If there was many intimacies between the man, not talking about the cotton, we're talking about generally shivcha charufa. So, if he has many intimacy, whether he does it intentionally, mistakenly, normally a korban is only for a mistake, and here it's whether you do it mizad mishgaga, and when you do it many times, normally you would bring different korbanos. Meishim maybe osham echad. He brings only one osham. That's for the man. But she would be liable for lashes for every intimacy, just like only chayv lavin, that for every act, for every lav you do, you're mechuyev a separate malchus. Thus haste, which means by it is the bia ageder unchayv lavin. By her, this is the definition. Those obligated of lav, and that's her punishment as a lav. And you get malchus for that. It's different. It's strange. The Shloimar Ados is the Hasbor in them. So we can say this explains what the Magen Mishnah Zogt. Magen Mishnah explains the Rambam. Why is there a punishment on the Shivcha Charufa, on the cotton, on the Ben Tezvim Echod? The Rambam holds everything is up to the woman. The Gemara says, when the woman gets malchus, the man brings a korban. She doesn't get malchus, maybe korban. The Gemara says, Min nolon. How do we know that the person's malchus of the ish hinges on the woman's getting malchus? So the pasuk says that a man. So we're talking about the act that a man does. Is yishkav es isha shivazera. He has an intimacy with this woman, And then it says, then the pasuk goes and says, "V'hi shivcha necharefes liish." And then we're talking about that she was a maidservant who was half free and half eved, half omo, and she was betrothed to an eved ivri. V'hovdei lo nivdoso, but she was not totally freed, which means she was only chatzi. She was not being redeemed or not been given freedom. Not given freedom, not raised by paying her money or without or freeing the master by itself. The bottom line, she remained an Oma. So the Gemara says, Rabbi says, Michdi ad hocho v'ish komishto yikro. The pasuk was talking about the man. V'ish ki ish kavesisha. Nichta v'hevis hashamoy la'Hashem. So then, after this case, pasuk should follow up by saying he should bring his asum to Hashem. And then the pasuk should go ahead and say, but what happens to the woman? Why does the pasuk first say what happens to the woman? That she gets malchus, that you have to inspect and give her malchus. In the end, he writes that he brings his asham to Hashem about the korban asham. So what are we saying like this? If there's going to be an inspection and she's going to be guilty, then he brings an asham to Hashem. But if it's not going to be the inspection, she's not going to be guilty of malchus. So he should not bring the korban asham there. Learn the Rambam learns that this is not nor a simon. So the Rambam learns that this is not just a sign, but nor dosis kein tam v'siba. This is actually a reason and the cause. Why does he have to bring the asham Hashem and he'll atone for him? That comes a result from them was erod gebracht zu bekoidestia. Since you caused the bekoidestia, you became a metzias that brings about the bekoidestia. Gebracht zu the isha zum chiv malchus. You brought the chiv malchus. So it turns out in this case, the minor has a connection to the result, and that's why he gets punished with the korban asham. Und der Ribrat is a shayches euch zakotten, and that's why this also is connected to a minor. If the one that is sheikh meisha with the shivcha nechrefs lish, why? By other eyes is that Isur v'chiv oifam boyel v'nivelis mitzad yeder mitzad atzmei. Over there, by the other ayahs, the prohibition and the obligation for the man and for the woman who have intimacy, each one is responsible themselves for their act. So on a minor, you cannot place no obligation, no punishment. Not even an obligation for atonement. And he can also not be dragged along because of the obligation that the other person gets. Because he's not dragged in, because it is an entity, it's a prohibition and an obligation by itself. As opposed to the Shivcha Rufa is Akol Toluba. Everything hangs on her. It's not his separate issue. It's all her issue. The Chiv of Osham of an Ish is nor, it's the obligation of Osham on the man is nor Valzain Maise is the Sib of the Chiv Isha, because his act is the cause why the woman has to get Malchus. And in them, and in that, also the minor is being dragged and included al derech hanal, similar to what we said before. Al mitzad der mitzvah shala'av to learn the Torah mit benoi. And because there's a mitzvah on a father to learn to teach Torah to his son, or the mechanech zayin, or the education. Wer der Kotten angerufen am mechuyev b'davar, he's referred to Kotten, is called somebody who's obligated. Al derech zoich do. Same thing here. The bald as the Maise when them cotton is abitoida Maise, since the act of the cotton becomes according to the Torah an act which brings about the chiyuv malchus for the woman, was bring to feel the chiyuv malchus. The father is who may be korban. That's why he brings the korban. So that is why even a cotton, because the cotton's act here brings about. In other arayis and other isurim, there's a chiyuv for each one. Nobody's dragged into anything. His act and her act, and therefore he's a minor. We can't hold him responsible for his act. But in this case, the Torah says that his act brings about the chiyuv malchus for the woman. That means that he is an entity, and that entity needs to bring a korban. That's why he's mechuyev korban. So test from kol anal is oich do ahiro in goydel ha'erech from chinuch. From all the above, there is a lesson. How great is the value of education, especially when teaching Torah. Education has a very special, specific connection to the time when we count the Omer, Pesach, which is in between Pesach, which is Manche Hussein, the time of our freedom. Shavuos and Shavuos, that's the day of Sfira. So Matan Teresena when we were given the Torah. And the Sfira days connect and unite Pesach and Shavuos. Was Bachaga Pesach Zetman Be'ofen Boilet, and the Pesach festival we see in a very clear, obvious way that Goshe in Inyan Chinuch Achinuch L'Mitzvahs V'Nakot, in the concept of education for mitzvahs for a minor. Noisaf al-Hanal, in addition to the above, was by einem from the mitzvahs Ikriyas from Yitzias Mitzrayim, Korban Pesach. So before we're already talking about that, one of the main mitzvahs of Yitzias Mitzrayim, Korban Pesach, we find as Rachmon Rabbi Chaim that the Torah included a minor. So we see this idea of including a minor as well. Is there Seder from Pesach, Haggadah, or Sipri Yitzias Mitzrayim? The Seder that we make on Pesach, the Haggadah that we say, and the telling of the story of the exit of Egypt, Meyusad is based off, verbunden mit, and it's connected, teaching your son. Bechlolus, in general, so we see this education. Education is what the Pesach is about. The Seder, the Haggadah, Yitzias Mitzrayim. In addition to the Korban Pesach, is also includes Haggadah. Bechlolus, in general, Verdi Yitzia von Yiddischen Volk from Mitzrayim, the exodus of the Jewish people of Mitzrayim, verglichen in the Nevuos Yechezkel, in the prophecy of Yechezkel, zum Geburt von a Kind, to the birth of a child, was so that in itself, that this was the birth Pesach, and the birth of a child starts education. Was bald noch dem Hebtzich von der Chinuch. Soon afterwards begins the education, Zainer al Sisay l'Kol Mechayo, as a basis, a foundation for all of the life of the child. So that's another Chinuch issue. Same thing is with the festival of Shavuos. Zman Matan Tereseinu, the time when the Torah was given. That was the beginning of studying the Torah through our Father in heaven with his children. Am Yisrael, that's the Jewish people. Aleim Nemar, it's with them, as we said. Bonim Atam Lashem Elgich, you are Hashem's children. Hashem started to teach his children. Al Derech Zeh Be'avu Ben Lamato. Similar to this is by a father and son below. Even though that, as far as general mitzvahs is so regular mitzvahs, all mitzvahs, the obligation of the father to educate his son is not from the Torah, but from Divrei Sofrim. is the Talmud Torah. Mitzvah says in a Torah. But for learning Torah over there, the positive mitzvah is a Torah command Allah on the father l'lamed his bnei hakotan Torah to teach his small young son, minor son Torah. Noisuf lazeh. In addition to that, so that's Shavuos connected with the education. That Shem gave the Torah because as a merit, because of education. Nor durch them was Banenu Eri Meisonu, when the Yidden said that our children will guarantee for us, and how that Eberster masking events given the Torah, Shem gave the Torah. That means that we're going to educate our children. Darfke durch them was Megit Akin them kind. Achinuch b'mitzvahs, specifically through this that you give a child an education in mitzvahs, vert amitziz b'fnei atzmai, that makes him into an entity on of its own, und hat an eigenen Verbund mit der mitzvah, that gives him his own connection with the mitzvah. In this Kalil, as mentioned earlier, the kotna leim vert angerufen amachui b'dover, the minor himself is called somebody who's obligated in the matter. Or noch matter. But the Gele Talmud Torah, as far as when you teach them Torah, Shas will let them Torah mit a kind. When you teach Torah to a child, this is a mitzvah kochochem v'chochem Yisrael, quoting from the Shulchan Aruch Talmud Torah, that is a mitzvah for every chochem of Yidden, the Lamed, as kol hatamidim, to teach all students, afal pisha ein bonov, even though they're not your children, shenemar. Because the pasuk says, "V'shenamtum levanecha elu talmidecha," teach them to your children. Those are your sons. This is from the Talmud Torah in the Rambam. Machtmanim ametzias chadosha. You make him into a new entity. You make him into a b'fnei atzma. B'tzir b'fnei atzma. The Talmud wird verbunden mit Torah. The student becomes tied with Torah, or mit neusna Torah, with the one who gave Torah, with Hashem. Chazal, as our sages, blessed memory, say, is ben Torah. Anyone who teaches the son of his friend Torah is kilu, malo l'vakosov kilu yoldi. The pasuk counts it as if you gave birth to him. Them alam is verstandig. So from all the above, it's understood. Dem goydel hachiyu v'hishtadlus. The great obligation and effort was licht of yedneinam, which lies on each one. Abzugeben sich, to devote themselves mit chinuch, with education for Bnei Yisrael, from the sons and daughters of Israel. The limud ha-Torah b'kiyum ha-mitzvahs, by the study of Torah and observance of mitzvahs. B'frat b'yomin elu, especially during these days, for this is the zeit. Now is the time was megreitzich to the Yimei HaChoifesh, that you're getting ready for the vacation days. Then you have to see to it as yet that Yiddish kind, every Jewish child, Ingela or Amedela, a boy or a girl, so zainin asviv Torah v'yishamayim, Torah v'yiras shamayim, so it should be in an environment of Torah and fear of heaven. The meshach chotshei hakayis, during the duration of the summer. Umatoiv, and best would be an overnight camp. The meshach chov dalet shoyes hayom, to be all 24 hours in that environment of Torah v'yiras shamayim. Those that sein euch the achone will also be the preparation to add to the education from boys and girls, for the duration, the rest of the time, the rest of the year that follows the summer, to also add in the education of the boys and children, through starting off with the camps and bringing them into that environment. This is Mesichas Chag HaShavuos Tovshin Chof Ches, Shabbos Parshas Nosoi Tovshin Lamed Aleph.